became involved in bird conservation by researching bird window collisions. He then founded Bird Lab, a nonprofit dedicated to studying and implementing solutions to human-related sources of avian mortality, particularly within cities. Nick has pioneered a novel approach to architecture by integrating his deep interest in the natural world, especially bird life. Central to his cross-disciplinary
Do you have
work,
Zoom on your?
resolving
You
conflicts
need
between
Zoom.
the natural and built environments. Other research interests of his include how cities affect avian migration and how migratory birds utilize urban and suburban habitats. With research and teaching appointments from California to Pennsylvania, Nick has gained significant insight into the challenges birds face nationwide. His unique perspective focuses on promoting healthy landscapes across the various ecosystems birds traverse during migration, from cities to forests. We are so excited to have Nick with us tonight. I love the work that you do and the human that you are. You are very wonderful, and our human and feathered friends appreciate your work. So, before I hand the Zoom over to Nick, can we please all make sure we are muted for the duration of the talk, and we will open for questions after the talk. Thank you very much.
Ah, that was a wonderful introduction, Tamara. Thank you. Really excited to be a part of the meeting tonight. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and jump in. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things, a little bit of my background, the work of Bird Lab, and then of course it all goes back to migratory songbirds. I do have this architecture background that I still utilize now and again. But I'm also working as a bird scientist. And so the title here, Between the City and the Forest, sort of captures the spaces that I inhabit. I was a practicing architect in a very traditional sense in the city of Pittsburgh for many years, and then started doing some bird banding and bird conservation outside of the city of Pittsburgh. And now my work with Bird Lab is at the intersection of that. Hang on. So yeah, I don't practice as an architect a whole lot anymore, but like I mentioned, I do utilize that background, particularly when it comes to helping architects design bird-friendly buildings. The image on the right is taken at the Bear Run Nature Reserve, one of my most favorite places in the world. It's where Falling Water's at. We do some field work there with Bird Lab as a collaboration between Bird Lab and the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. I can't wait for it to look like this again. Winter has been a little bit hard this year, and I can't wait for the warmer months again. A little quote from Annie Dillard. She's one of my favorite authors. And I often reflect on this when I'm in cities, and when I'm doing my field work in cities, when I'm teaching my architecture students, for example, at Carnegie Mellon, that nature is often hidden, sometimes overcome, but seldom is it extinguished. And so that's just a really nice reminder that even in the most human altered landscapes, nature is present. And if we see it and work with it, nature can actually thrive alongside us. One of my sort of most favorite things in the world is when birds can coexist with us and live like on our buildings. This is an eastern phoebe nest at Kentuck Knob, which is one of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses out in the Laurel Highlands. It's like the most perfectly placed nest. And I love that. I love when birds can find places to carry out their breeding. I think it's just really cool and shows that if we design in really sensitive ways, we can have more of this, more kind of integration between the built environment and the natural world. Um, Funny enough, I often get like questions from people about how to deter birds from like doing that, like nesting on their house. I never really understood that completely. But this past year, I got the first ever question about how to build something for a bird to nest on someone's house. So this is a person who lives in Regent Square who had a robin trying to nest on the cap of the column to their porch, but the ledge wasn't big enough, and he wanted to know how he could build, like what he could build to allow for the robin to actually like make a nest. And so he had some old scrap wood and built a little platform. Most of the time, people are asking me how to like deter birds, but this was very excitingly an opportunity for me to chat with someone about how to encourage birds to nest on the house here. And he's a big native plant guy also. So once the robins fledge, you can see them in the bottom right-hand corner. They have lots of good native habitat to poke around in after the young robin fledge. So uh, super cool. I like sharing this with my architecture students as a kind of the basic example of how nature can work with our buildings. Um, I got into birds because I've always loved birds. I've always been a bird admirer, a bird watcher. I grew up in suburban Pittsburgh, and I am always surprised at the birds that turn, like what kinds of birds turn up where. And there are really interesting species. Really, no matter where you go, you can find something. Um, these are a few little videos of birds in my own backyard here in the city of Pittsburgh. I live in Lawrenceville, which is a neighborhood that doesn't actually have a lot of green space. I have a small backyard with three mature trees in it, and the density of bird life in my tiny little like 20-foot by 40-foot backyard like is astonishing because most of the trees are native and all of the understory and all of the perennials are native, and the birds realize that. And so I've been in this house since 2013, and every spring a yellow-bellied sapsucker appears in my backyard. And it's amazing to me that in this otherwise very urbanized area, a yellow-bellied sapsucker manages to find this bitternut hickory tree. You can see it climbing um, the tree trunk there. And so there are generations of sapsucker holes. Of course, sapsuckers are a type of woodpecker. They drill into the trees to lap up the sap that the tree leaks out from the drilling. Goldfinches here on evening primrose stalks. Evening primroses grow abundantly in the alley, and so I go and cut the stalks and then bring them into my yard. They can't really grow there because it's shaded, but these are my bird feeders in the wintertime. So just a nice reminder to leave the seed pods on all of your native plants once they go dormant. Common grackles in my backyard. One of the earliest signs of spring. We should be seeing these birds sometime in February is when I usually first start seeing them, and they're one of the earliest migrants. And a little downy woodpecker on a grape on a grapevine, looking for small insects and things like that to survive the winter. Um, and I just want to show a couple of images of some artwork that I really love that are bird themed, bird related. Specifically, the work of Javi Bao. He's a photographer, and he takes photographs of birds in flight and then layers them. And I mean, ultimately, why I love birds so much is because, like, from a young age, because I was fascinated by the way that they fly, and that they can fly. And so Javi Bao's images kind of show that. They show the mechanics of flight. They show the patterns that birds fly in and the invisible trajectories through the sky. Just going to go through a couple of them. Um, there's a quote in here by Jennifer Ackerman, though, that I should read before I go through them. The gift of flight is a sublime adaptation, a way for birds to defy gravity and inhabit a realm where the boundaries of earth and sky blur into endless possibilities. So here's zooming out a little bit, photographing flocks of birds moving through the sky. A very large flock of birds. This is probably a flock of starlings out in a farm field, flocking to a single tree. Um, the circular pattern of these of these birds probably suggest that they're raptors of some kind, kind of like hovering or floating through the sky, riding thermals to make flight easier for themselves. And a duck, probably a duck taking off from the water. So birds have always been a strong part of my of who I am and have accompanied me for most of my life. It's really exciting to be developing ways to conserve them, given how much of a hard time they're having at the moment in terms of population and the like. The gift of flight, though, is the thing that often gets birds into trouble when they encounter cities. So I'm going to pivot a little bit here, and I am going to show a few images of dead birds because this is the part of the talk where I'm going to talk about bird collisions. So when birds fly into windows, and I just want to mention that in case anyone doesn't want to see that. They're not like gruesome or anything like that, but I just want to warn people because birds fly these remarkable distances. Many of them are migrants, and they can thrive and live within the built environment, but there are a lot of dangerous scenarios that get them into trouble. And the problem of window collisions is arguably the biggest one. This is a picture of a female common yellowthroat that I found in the springtime that collided with windows at the Carnegie Museum here. You could see why the reflection of the trees in those big windows creates the illusion of habitat. Um, and um, and the collision occurred. This is one of millions of birds that die in this way, whether it be on a big public building or on our, kitchen window or whatever it is. A lot of birds die this way. The kind of funny thing about this image is, aside from the dad and his son kind of like oblivious to the bird, is that you'll see like some white dots on the glass. Those are there to prevent humans from walking into the glass. So we need to do a similar thing for birds, so they can see the glass also. It's just that the density of the dots has to be a little bit different. And I'll go into that later in the presentation. Is a quote by Daniel Clem. He has done a lot of research on how birds see glass and how we can make cities better for birds. Bird window collisions are among the leading human-associated threats to birds, yet they are often overlooked because of their invisibility to the public eye. Each collision represents a failure in our architectural design that demands urgent attention and action. So even though this is happening at a very large scale, there are things that we can do about it. And I'm going to talk about some of those things. Um, the part about the problem being kind of invisible in that quote is kind of true. If you're not looking for collisions, you're not really gonna see them, but I'm wired to look for them. So I maybe weekly find a collision victim. I was just taking a stroll through Shadyside back in the fall, and there was a Swainson's thrush on the sidewalk in the middle of Shadyside. So these things are happening. Scarlet tanager in the middle of breeding season, really upsetting because this was like in July when scarlet tanagers are actively breeding. So this male was probably out looking for food for his young. Depending on how old those baby birds were, they probably didn't survive. They probably wouldn't have survived without their father. These things have an impact. It's not just the one bird. So if this bird died, that means that the birds it was attempting to raise may have died also, because he couldn't supply food to them. Mourning dove on an Aldi in the city of Pittsburgh. And the American Bird Conservancy actually just revised some numbers that in the US alone, over 1 billion with a B birds die by hitting glass, whether it be on a building, public building, or your back patio door or your kitchen window. It happens at a large scale, and we got to do something about it. Um, and just like, I field so many questions related to collisions. It feels like weekly I get someone asking me questions about it. So at the end of the talk, if you have questions about it, please reach out. Um, this is somebody who found me who lives in Hawaii, that had heard that Bird Lab does work with collisions and reached out. They were getting collisions on their house in rural Hawaii. And so Bird Lab is sort of born out of the love I have of the natural world and of birds, and of this question about how to design bird-friendly cities. Other questions about bird migration have always sort of accompanied Bird Lab as well. Our mission statement, which is just simply that we create and implement bird-focused conservation practices. We do things like bird banding, we do bird walks, we do native plant consulting. If you're like thinking about specific plantings for native birds, all native plants, right, are going to help native birds in some way, but some are a little bit better at it than others. Collision consulting, and we do a lot of teaching and education from like super young kids in the Hill District to grad students at Carnegie Mellon and every kind of demographic in between. So the reason why collisions happen, kind of going into a little bit more detail, is because windows are reflective. And so this is a really great example of it in a residential uh, building. This is a house out in the Laurel Highlands. Lots of big picture windows to take advantage of the view out into the forest. But you can see how perfect and how clear those tree reflections are. And so birds are foraging in their environment and they get tricked and they fly towards what they think is habitat and then don't have enough time to steer away from it once they realize, if they even do realize, they're about to hit the window. One of the really easy things that you can do is just install a product called Feather Friendly, which is just a pattern of dots spaced 2 inches apart over top of the glass. It's super easy to install. I have friends who have a cabin out in Butler County. They have they had a picture window that was getting collisions on it, and I installed on a 3 foot by 4 foot window this pattern. It took me 45 minutes. And here's a little time lapse video of what that looks like. You just put some guides down, and then you roll out this tape, and then you peel it back, and it leaves an 1/8 inch diameter dot on the surface of the glass. It has to be on the outside of the glass for it to be really to be effective. And after you do that, you will have a drastic reduction, if not a complete reduction, of collisions on your window. And there it is. That's all it is. This is one of the single most effective things you can do. So if you're attracting birds to your yard with all your native plants, and you're getting collisions on your windows, this is definitely something to do. And then from the inside, you can barely see it because your eye wants to focus to the things outside. And so, yeah, those little dots appear even more minimal on the inside. Some other kind of quick things you can do if you're specking, if you're getting new windows, just getting insect screens for the outside of the window instead of the inside, like is huge because the screen is sort of going to break up the reflection, but also it's just going to function as a kind of like trampoline for the bird. They're not going to actually collide with the glass. These are Acopian bird savers. This is just hanging string over top of the glass and some more architectural interventions. These projects weren't specifically bird safe, but they have design elements that are covering the glass that are making them bird safe. Housing project in San Francisco on the left there, these kind of movable panels are the blinds for the inside for these residential units, but they're on the outside of the glass. In any configuration, they're gonna break up the reflection, whether they're open or closed. And then the building on the right is San Francisco City Hall. I did a lot of field work in California, which is why I have some buildings in San Francisco. This building has a lot of glass on it also, but there's a kind of architectural screens on the outside of it that help to shield the glass and also make the building kind of visually interesting and unique. There's also this kind of fancy um, like glass that's not very reflective. It's called channel glass that isn't clear but has this really interesting kind of glowing effect out there. So I show architects a lot of these products and these projects specifically because architects are always wanting to think creatively about their projects. And so these methods, these materials, these ways of thinking help them to do that. And I frame my classes at Carnegie Mellon in a similar way. And the really exciting thing about collisions is that it's the movement is happening. There is increased awareness across the board for it. And we even have some examples of policy, which is ultimately the thing that's going to require buildings to be treated um, uh, at sort of the citywide scale. So New York City, San Francisco, the city of Toronto, there are places that have policy in place for the protection of birds. Teaching, um, I want to highlight some recent teaching that I've been doing, specifically at Carnegie Mellon, because I am teaching architecture students how to be in nature, how to appreciate birds, and how to be sensitive to bird life when they design cities and buildings. So this is me and one of the classes. We went out we went out for a light hike in Frick Park. They found a barred owl, which was like they couldn't believe that there were owls around. It's like, guys, these things are out there. And so they know to look for them now. And that's really, really exciting. One of the project prompts that the students had to do is they had to design a bird safe intervention at the Frick Environmental Center. So the Frick Environmental Center is at Frick Park. It is operated by Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. It's a building that has an awful lot of glass on it. And it's tucked into Frick Park. And so that glass is reflecting all kinds of habitat. And there's a collision problem here. And so why I chose this building was that like it was a building that the students at Carnegie Mellon could go to look at and to analyze. But then also it provided them with a chance to kind of explore the park also, to become familiar with the birds that are there. And so I'm going to highlight one of the projects, one of the student projects. If you see in this image off to the left there, there's this kind of stairwell that has these big panes of glass. And so one of my students designed a system to put over top of the glass to break up the reflections. And this is a digital rendering of that system. And you can see how it's breaking up the glass so that the birds can see it. But at the same time, it's doing something really visually interesting on the inside also, right? It's creating really cool shadows. It's sort of pixelating the sky in an interesting way. So I really love that. And here's a physical model of the outside of that system also. Here they're thinking really creatively about, things that they can do to help with birds and the collision problem. This past semester, I was teaching higher up in the architecture curriculum at Carnegie Mellon, where the students were tackling the issue of collisions, but also they were just tackling many of the issues that plague birds, that make it really difficult for them to breed and migrate and carry out various aspects of their life cycle. So I had a student who was taking on the ethylene cracker plant out in Beaver County, and creating a scenario where it actually gets shut down, because it's a greenhouse gas emitter. It's a pollutant. It's producing microplastics, right? It's doing a lot of bad things to the environment, and so she was looking at the industry leaving, but not necessarily taking things down, which would cost a lot of money. So it's like, the whole operation shuts down, all the chemicals and terrible things leave the building, but then there's this really amazing infrastructure. And so she was imagining how plants, native plants might start growing in this infrastructure, and creating habitat for birds, as we sort of kind of leave it, return back to nature. So really interesting to see the bottom image there of all of those stacks and industrial spaces kind of being rewilded, for birds and for other organisms. Here's another view of it. And then she started really thinking about habitat succession and thinking about like, okay, well, maybe eventually some of this infrastructure needs to go down, um, and kind of imagining 50 years out, the creation of a healthy functioning meadow. I had another student, looking at looking at how roads might be elevated, to restore streams. So a lot of major roads, in the city of Pittsburgh, like have been built over top of streams, or in some cases are next to streams. But regardless, the streams aren't healthy anymore. They're not functioning like streams should. And so he was looking at elevating roadways in strategic areas to allow streams, to come back. And so I love this image. A little romanticized here, but nonetheless, there's a really interesting idea here. What would it be like to drive down Washington Boulevard, uh, elevated so that the stream can be, daylighted and so that the stream can come back? Uh, Really, really beautiful idea. Another student here who's looking at, alternative fuel sources, looking at how biofuels could be created. And in this case, he came up with this algae growing system that would, grow on top of glass facades, that would break up the reflections for the birds, but also, that algae system would produce biofuel for the building that it was applied to. So, another kind of pie in the sky out there idea, but nonetheless, this is what the purpose of the class is, to think in very imaginative ways, about how, architecture can, um, be, better for the natural world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bird banding now, kind of switching gears a little bit. So, this sort of takes us as sort of the forest part, of Bird Lab. We run a number of bird banding operations in southwestern Pennsylvania. Bird banding is a way to study birds up close. Birds are really good indicator species. They can tell us a lot about the health of an ecosystem. And so bird banding allows us to qualify habitats, through the birds. And bird banding involves us, stringing up, um, what kind of like looks like a volleyball net, just made out of really thin black thread, so that it's really hard to see. And the little diagram on the left kind of shows that. We kind of tie them down. We put the nets in places where we think there are birds, and everything comes down after we ban birds for the day. You can see, a cardinal in my hand, in the image to the right there, collecting data from it. So yeah, they reveal a lot to us, about the ecosystems that they're flying around in. The image of the forest there actually has one of those nets. You can kind of see it. It looks shimmery, and you can see the metal pole that it's holding it up. So the birds fall into the pockets of the net, and you can see the bird on the bottom right there is hanging in one of those pockets. So, we are highly trained, to do this. Bird banding requires federal and state permits and a lot of training. Um, and we go around every 20 minutes or so and we pull the birds out of the pockets. We take them back to our little, field station, and we apply a band to their leg, that has a unique ID number on it. And you can see the thrush that I'm holding, it's a gray cheek thrush, has one of those ID bands. They're super tiny. They're made out of an aluminum alloy and super light. and that'll be on the bird for life. And so if I catch that bird again, or if someone else catches that bird, we have a much deeper story, and we can start connecting pieces of the puzzle together. Uh, and we have, technology that allows us to even track birds, and develop maps that kind of show us specific routes that they take. And so the banding process can reveal a lot about um, how birds utilize local habitats, but in the case of like us tracking them across much larger scales, can show us how and when they migrate, whether or not they cross bodies of water, which part of the country they're migrating through. So it's pretty remarkable what they can teach us and show us. Here's the little banding station, that has all the tools that we use. Familiar bird in hand. At the bottom there, Carolina wren. It's amazing that they're able to survive winters like the one that we're experiencing. I had one singing this morning in my backyard. So for a mostly insect-eating bird, that they're enduring like through these frigid temperatures, and the snow on the ground is pretty remarkable. And a picture of the wing. We look at the feathers in the wing to help us like figure out how old the birds are. um, Blackpoll warbler on top there. And I'm going to show you a little video at the bottom here. So we look at how much fat birds carry when we ban them, because the amount of fat that they have can tell us a lot about how much food they're finding in their ecosystems. And so especially in the migratory period, birds really build a lot of fat, and we can see that by blowing on the feathers. And so when I activate the video here, you're going to see very close to my thumb. You can kind of see it now, kind of a yellowish patch. That's a big fat deposit. Um, and I'm going to play that, and you'll see it. That kind of yellowish area is fat. And again, we like to see that because that means the birds are finding enough food, and it means that they're able to complete these really incredible journeys. Blackpoll warblers are a species of songbird that undertake one of the most amazing migrations of any songbird, you could say, in the world. They fly over the Atlantic Ocean and then come down into South America, which is really amazing for a bird that is, teeny tiny, um, maybe weighing 15 grams. So they undertake these incredible migrations, and they need a lot of food to be able to do that. And their food, of course, is linked to the presence of native plants. And so there's a really strong relationship between quality of habitat, birds finding enough food, and the presence of native plants. Um, when we ban birds, we are also looking at what things are happening in the ecosystem as a whole. So the birds are the most important sort of provide the most important data set for us. But we also take data on other things that are occurring in the ecosystem. So we note like natural history events. So like we note when the American toads like spawn and lay their eggs in the little springtime pools. We look at when native plants come into bloom. We look at when they bud. We look at when the leaves fall. And we try and correlate our banding data to those cycles, because everything in the natural world is like connected, and every system is responding to another system. And so the birds are telling us a lot, but we're also looking at what the plants are telling us also, because it's all timed together. Bird banding is also a really great outreach tool and education tool. So we do host families and classes and anyone who has a general interest in birds. So you can get to see the birds up close and in hand. And it's super, super family friendly. The bird on the left is a yellow-breasted chat. And I'm holding in the image to the right a house wren, which is a common breeding bird in southwestern Pennsylvania. The little kid, like looking at me, that's his life for house wren. He'd never seen a house wren before, and he got to see his first one up close through the banding process. And then all the birds are released and go on to continue foraging and migrating and doing the things that they're doing. So a nice dramatic video of a blue jay taking off after the banding process. Our banding work is focused primarily in spring and fall. We do banding work in the summertime also, but primarily our biggest effort is in spring and fall because that's when birds are actively moving. That's when they're migrating, and we're asking migration-focused questions through the banding process, like, questions about how long does a migratory bird stop in a given habitat on its migration to refuel, like in our region. Um, so this blue-winged warbler right now is nice and comfortable in Central America, excuse me, and in in like 3.5 months, it's going to be in southwestern Pennsylvania, either here to breed or kind of moving onward to find breeding territory further north. So this is, an important time. Spring and fall are important times for birds because they're trying to find their breeding territories, and whether that's a cardinal like moving across the block, or from one backyard to another. Cardinals are resident birds, or if it's a bird like this, kind of going cross-continent, we get a lot of information from birds during that migratory season. The blue is where the birds winter. The yellow in that map is the areas that they migrate through, and then that kind of reddish orange is their breeding area. Um, To understand migration, this is a quote by one of my favorite authors, Scott Wiedensaul. To understand migration is to grasp the interconnectedness of the world as birds knit the globe together with their journeys, crossing borders and ecosystems in a way that transcends human imposed boundaries. I love that. The birds don't know boundaries. They just they know where they have to go, and they do whatever it takes to get there. And so whatever we can do to help make that journey easier for them, it's important for us to do that. The migration banding project that we do in spring and fall is split between 3 sites, split across 3 sites. So we have an urban site, a suburban site, and a rural site. And we banded each one of those in a given week twice. So 2 days at the urban site, 2 days at the suburban site, 2 days at the rural site. And that's because we're trying to understand how birds utilize um, degraded habitats. So the hypothesis here is that birds in a rural area, because there tends to be more native plants, better habitat, are going to find more food resources than birds that are in suburban and urban habitats because there are fewer native plants in those ecosystems and the habitat is degraded more. And so there's a sort of gradient from city to forest that we're banding in to better understand how birds are using those ecosystems. So you can kind of see that from these aerial photographs, right? The rural site at the bottom there, mostly green. The suburban site, you have like green and a lot of single family housing plans. So it's kind of like 50-50. And then the top image is our urban site, Hayes Woods. You can kind of see that kind of green zone at the Horseshoe Bend in the Monongahela River there, and then kind of more urbanized development around it. So those are our 3 study sites. The suburban site is in Upper St. Clair, and the rural site is in Chicora, which is in Butler County. A couple of images of the site. Hayes Woods is like a spectacular green space. It's the city of Pittsburgh's newest city park. You look at this image and it like feels like you're in a wilderness, right? Even though the power line cut is there, it just like doesn't feel like anything's around. But this is right, this is in Pittsburgh, 667 acres, I believe. The suburban site, um, complete with white picket fence and everything, and then the rural site, which has the best sort of habitat quality out of all the three sites. All three sites have an open area, um, and that open space is just slightly different at each of the sites. So at the rural site, it's a meadow. At the suburban site, it's a lawn. And at the urban site, it's a power line cut. And so that is a shared feature. That open space is a shared feature across all the three sites. And then there's mature forest at all three sites also. And so we put our nets in various locations within those spaces. Um, Hayes Woods, an up close view of it, you can really kind of see that power line cut. The meadow is alive in the summertime. There are field sparrows and common yellowthroats out here. We've banded 74 species of birds at Hayes Woods. It's actually our highest. It's even higher. We banded more species at Hayes Woods than we have at our site in Chicora, the rural site, which is an interesting data point. 65 species in Upper St. Clair, which is still pretty remarkable. It's only 10 less. Um, there are some species that we only band at this suburban site, like mourning warblers and Philadelphia vireos, interestingly. So these are species that are very specialized, that don't breed anywhere near the city of Pittsburgh. And so to have them stop over in a suburban backyard is kind of amazing. So, it all goes back to that idea that like even in degraded habitats, even in habitats where there are a lot of people, interesting things occur. And so, whatever we can do to help those creatures, even if it's for a day or two, it's important to do that. And then 68 species at the rural site at Chicora. And so all we do, all this bird banding is ultimately like going back to the birds. So we collect this data from them. We collect data like that your doctor might collect from you when you go in for a checkup. We weigh the bird, we look at its fat, we look at molting feathers, we try and figure out how old the bird is. And then we assemble these data sets and then we create conservation plans. So whether it be a resident bird, like the cardinal is female cardinal, or a breeding migrant like the indigo bunting. Breeding migrant is a bird that migrates to our area to breed for the summer. They're not here in the wintertime. And then there's passage migrant. The Canada warbler on the left there is a passage migrant. So this is a bird that if you see it in the city of Pittsburgh, it's just kind of passing through. It's going somewhere else. So all of our data ultimately goes back to help these migratory songbirds, um, whether they're here for a day or two, like the Canada warbler, or whether they're here year round. The conservation plans that we put into place are there to help them. Um, and so this was a, a collaboration with Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy, so BirdLab and PPC. We partner on a lot of different things, but we got some money from Duquesne Light to grant money to look at our bird banding data and then to figure out where we could where we could prioritize some habitat restoration at Hayes Woods. And so this was a big understory tree planting event that we did that is a reflection of the bird banding data. So we pick species that are very bird friendly, and we qualified bird friendly plants from our data set. I have some plants that I can shout out at the end of the presentation that are especially bird friendly. But things that we have in here are we have we have some pawpaw, we have a red bud in here. We have a couple of magnolias. So yeah, really trying to create a robust understory. What was here before was bush honeysuckle, which of course is yeah, it's prolific and it's abundant and it's not actually great habitat for birds. So we tore those out and replaced them with native plants, bird-friendly native plants. And the nice thing is that we are going to continue bird banding at this given location. And so we'll be able to see how the birds respond as these understory trees and shrubs start to mature and really kind of create habitat in this location. So some things you can do at home to help birds. Um, Protect your windows. I know we all love native plants here, and so we are bringing birds into our backyards by doing so. And so ensuring that your windows are protected is a really important part of the native plant movement. Because yeah, we just don't want to create dangerous scenarios and attracting birds when there are unsafe conditions nearby. Curbing light pollution, so turning off non-essential lights at night. Birds, migratory birds primarily migrate, or most of them migrate at night. And so light pollution disrupts their migration. So curbing light pollution is something you can do at home also. Um, Protecting your cats and which protects them from the birds also. So free roaming cats, whether they be pets or feral cats, aren't native to our ecosystems, and so the birds don't have defense against them. And so keeping cats in catios is a great way to keep them outside, but to prevent them from interacting with birds. There are a lot of really great ideas out there. Some of them can be quite elaborate, but there are ways of letting your cat outside that also help to protect songbirds as well. And cats get the benefits of being outside and getting the stimulation and the fresh air. And then, of course, the one we all love that's essential to wild ones, reducing lawn and planting native plants. Um, this is a spot at Hayes Woods that we have analyzed over the years because there are like tons of birds here in this like corner of Hayes Woods. And so uh yeah, we have sort of like listing out some of those plants, and we try and replicate these plantings at Hayes Woods also to see if we can create the same kind of bird response in other locations. But this is like a really magical combination of plants. It's like pokeberry, woodland sunflower, like is Helianthus decapedalus is one of the most bird-friendly plants out there. It's amazing to see birds that like ordinarily don't inhabit like that are canopy specialists come down and will actually forage in Helianthus decapedalus, that woodland sunflower. It's also called pale sunflower. There's several common names for it. Um, but there's milkweed, goldenrod, boneset, ironweed, dogwood, basswood, Virginia creeper is another plant that birds really love. So this combination of plants, all these plants are in this image, and it just creates a very bird friendly um, habitat. And it's because things are blooming at different times, things are fruiting at different times. So there's abundance here at many points throughout the seasons. When I think about like native plantings, I like to think about like like the natural world and what's working in nature. So I try even in my own native plant gardens, I try and replicate these plantings. And I'm always like looking at like where birds are at when I think about native plantings in my own kind of backyard. And this is one of our study sites. This is the rural study site again, and I'm just going to kind of break down this image. There are a ton of birds here, and it's because of the layers of habitat. And so I like thinking about layers when I think about like designing native plant gardens. There's this like forest layer in the background. There's this kind of shrubby successional layer, and then there's this kind of meadow layer. And so all three of those together are attracting different species of birds. And so, kind of breaking it down by birds, you have scarlet tanagers, for example, that like the mature forest. You have chestnut-sided warblers that love that kind of shrubby layer, and then you have like field sparrows that love the herbaceous, the perennials, the goldenrods. And so, when you think about creating bird-friendly habitat through native plants, thinking about layers like this can help you to host all different kinds of species of bird. Um, as the images here are kind of showing. All three of these species are found at this site. Um, and uh, and so even though they're kind of habitat specialists, they each occupy a different zone. They all kind of interact because those different sort of zones within the ecosystem are kind of adjacent. They're all connected. So I included some it's winter. I want to be reminded of spring and summer right now. And so I have some pictures of things that we'll be experiencing in the coming months after we get past winter. But some nice gardens that, well, the one on the right, has a lot of those layers, which is different than the image on the left, which is what we are trying not to do. A nice reminder here that we love the right much more than the left. Um, I like to encourage people to leave some of the kind of quote unsightly things like dead tree limbs, because dead tree limbs, for example, are the places where cavity nesters tend to make their nests. So woodpeckers like northern flickers, right, will drill holes into dead and decaying wood. They'll nest in those, and then they won't return back, but then the secondary cavity nesters come in. So birds like chickadees and tufted titmouse, they actually use old woodpecker holes to breed in. And so just, leaving some dead wood around is a good way to create that bird-friendly habitat to sort of, add to the native plantings. We know about leaf litter. I could watch robins like foraging around in leaf litter like all day long. It's really cool to see them kind of picking up leaves and combing through kind of forest floor debris looking for food items. Um, and a lot of birds do this, particularly the sparrows also. So, a nice reminder about leaving leaves and debris in uh, your planting beds. And then, just a couple of photos here of some native plant gardens. This is in the city of Pittsburgh. Um, this is the guy who built the platform for his robins. This is his native plant garden. So those robins had some really great habitat to bob around in after the young fledged. So, so important, like to create these little ecosystems, like even in very urban areas. So good, right? Um, a friend of mine, Lauren Nagoda, who is a friend of Wild Ones, of course. Just I have some images of her native gardens and some of the birds that have come to her yard. And as she continues to build her native ecosystems in her suburban yard, right, she gets this like amazing diversity of birds. Baltimore Orioles, rose-breasted grosbeaks, pileated woodpeckers. So the more we plant, the more birds will respond positively to. Blackpoll warbler, yellow warbler, brown creeper. Not sure if Lauren's in the lecture today, but shout out to Lauren here. And I like using these images when I talk to people who don't know about native plants and don't know about their connection to the ecosystems, just kind of showing them the beneficial pollinators that respond also to native plants. I know the one on the right there is not a native plant technically. Bumblebee on spotted bee balm, one of my favorites. Hair streak butterfly. I think the one on the right is some kind of fritillary. And I always like to remind people to embrace the unpredictability, like especially like new native plant gardeners, and people who, want to do good things for birds. Just kind of like letting your yard evolve and unfold is the magic and why we all like gardening with native plants. Bird Lab, last few slides here. Bird Lab has aside from the native plant consulting that we do, we actually grow native plants also. And I've been doing it in my winter sowing in my little tiny Lawrenceville backyard. This is this year's, it was before the snow. This year's winter sowing boxes. We partner with Grow Pittsburgh. The idea there being that like we're encouraging people to feed themselves with native plants, but to also like think about, their own vegetable gardens and their own like bird-friendly gardens also, and that like you can feed yourself and the birds at the same time. There's some kind of permaculture aspects to that conversation also. So we sell our native plants. That we germinate from. We collect seeds from our local study sites. So they're all regional ecotypes. We sell them at Grow Pittsburgh's Garden Dreams greenhouse in Wilkinsburg. This was our sale from this past year. And we also sell our native plants at Stormy Oaks in Valencia, Pennsylvania. This is Beth McMaster's uh, um, area, the Stormy Oaks Nature Conservancy. This is during their fall festival. We set up a little pop-up and sell native plants there also. And so just again, like, all that we do for all of this research we do, all of the native plants, like, ultimately it's to make better ecosystems so that people and natural systems can work together. And, you know, personally, I do all of this because I want to ensure that these magical creatures that are flying incredible distances, that are singing and wearing the most beautiful plumage you've ever seen to ensure that they can survive and thrive and carry out their breeding cycles and do all the things that they need to do. So we'll just end the lecture there with some pictures of beautiful birds, and I imagine there's time to stick around for conversation. Happy to answer questions. So let me know.
Thank you so much, Nick. Ed, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I have a ton of questions. I should just meet with you separately, but
Hi,
the
Ed.
hi. The main one is like at a local policy level, what could we do in a kind of a coordinated way to help the cause? And one comment I want to make is it seems like it would be a lot easier to um, include, I mean, like bird-friendly measures and producing windows and that sort of thing rather than retrofitting.
Yeah, that's a good distinction you're making. The most of the things that I talked about today, particularly with the feather friendly, the dots, right? Those are really good retrofit products. So things to do afterward. There are kinds of glass that you can buy that have like patterns baked into the glass, for example, in the factory. So there are a wide range of products across all different price points. So, I mean, I was actually even on I was on Facebook earlier, and I belonged to the local bird groups, and somebody had taken like window paint and had drawn patterns, right? So I guess that's the cheapest thing you could do. And technically, if you didn't even want to do that, you could take a bar of soap, like from your bathtub or whatever, and like do the same pattern. So there are things you can do at a number of different kind of price points. As far as your question about like policy, I think starting small is the way to go. So like, meeting with your like local representative and just kind of like talking about what you care about and And with that, conversation is probably, if it's related to birds, like talking about like, bird declines, the issue of collisions. Most people don't even understand or know about the issue of collisions. And so, even just kind of basic information is important and the way to get things started. So I'm happy to support, BirdLab is happy to support um, people who maybe want to tackle that or meet with their local representatives to start talking about some of these issues, particularly when they're related to collisions and outdoor cats.
I want to briefly mention Birdtown if you want to comment on that. Swissvale is Birdtown, for example. I don't know if
Yeah,
Pittsburgh, if it isn't, we should be.
right. The city of Pittsburgh isn't, but Birdtown, yes, that's an Audubon program that encourages all kinds of bird-friendly practices, from planting native plants to treating windows to curbing light pollution and I believe they won't certify your yard if you have a cat outside. But yes, their initiative, like that Bird Town initiative, is a really great expansion of their backyard bird certification, to sort of up the scale, right? To make it something that is a neighborhood wide instead of just kind of discrete backyards here and there.
Come
Nick,
on.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So at what point should you consider treating your windows? I ask because I have never had any collisions in my house and I care about the birds very much, but at the same time, if it's not in a
Yeah.
flyway, I wondered what are some signs that you should treat your windows?
Yeah, so like the if you've never seen or heard a collision, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not happening also. And especially like if you don't work out of your house, or you're not home very often, collisions can happen when we're not there. They also tend to happen, like they can happen very early in the morning. So depending on what your sleep schedule is, you might sleep through a potential collision, um, and uh, and so I like to encourage people, like like if you've had at least one collision on a window, it should be treated. And I also like to encourage people to either preemptively do it or do it even if they haven't experienced a collision. If they have like a large picture window that overlooking a garden, for example, or a forest or whatever it is, you can preemptively like do some things as well. And I learned the hard way on my own house in Lawrenceville, being a very urban area. My front windows don't like look out over any habitat. And I've been in this house over 10 years and I never had a collision on those front windows. I have windows on the back that overlook my garden that were problematic, that have been treated. But the ones on the front, I chose not to do because there's no habitat there. But I had a house finch collide with the windows on the front. So if I had been kind of preemptively thinking about it, I would have treated those windows. So that's my project to do this winter, is to put some decals on these front windows now also. So yeah, at least one collision, but like if the glass is overlooking like if you have a view of a feeder or any kind of green space, the potential definitely is there. The other thing is, like, if a bird hits, that doesn't also mean that they're gonna like die on impact. So a lot of evidence sort of might slip away, meaning like sometimes the birds hit the windows and they're stunned and they'll kind of like scurry off. Or if you have like a resident chipmunk that like runs like the perimeter of your house, for example, chipmunks will predate um like a stunned or dead bird.
Yep.
So the evidence isn't always there also. So just something to think about as well.
Thank you.
Hmm.
I
Now,
have
how
a
about those
question too. Oh,
I'm sorry,
sorry, Ed.
two-way windows where you can see out, but that people can't see in? Does that protect birds?
The no, because the reflection of the habitat, it's all about the reflection of the habitat.
Uh-huh.
The reflect, even though you can't see through the glass, the reflection of the trees outside of the building onto the exterior surface of that glass is still there.
Thanks.
Hmm.
Okay, what is the behavior where, so sometimes the bird isn't colliding, right? But they're seeing their reflection maybe, and they're
Yeah.
coming at the window.
Yeah.
Does treating the window also deter that type of behavior?
Unfortunately, no. That's a different condition, right? Because like they aren't like looking at the they aren't getting tricked by the habitat. They're doing exactly what you're describing is they're seeing their reflection and they think it's another individual there who's intruding or coming into their territory. Very often like male cardinals are sort of notorious for this. Robins are also a lot of backyard birds. But really, any bird might do that. So unfortunately, what you have to do in those scenarios is you just have to figure out how to block the window, like temporarily. So I know it's an inconvenience, but like hanging a sheet over the glass is the thing to do because even with the dots on the glass, for example, that cardinal is still going to see his like reflect like
Yeah.
his face, essentially his face in the glass, like between the dots. So you just have to like erase the reflection and hopefully within um like a day or a couple of days
Figure it out.
and after the hormones leave the body like you should be okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a
thanks.
question about other glass surfaces that are around. This is Chris Lundberg talking on Marion's channel.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of parked vehicles that have a lot of glass surface area. Is there any evidence that that's a problem, even if it's not on the scale of buildings? And what could be done about that if it is a problem?
Yeah, I've seen a bird fly into the glass into the windshield like of a parked car before. So it can happen, absolutely. I just like there aren't right, like yeah, I mean you can't really put dots on you. I mean, I guess the thing to do is like if you really want to be vigilant, right? If you're like parking your car in an area where there are a lot of birds, like maybe this might be like maybe a specific condition. You might want to consider like putting something over top of the windows of your car, I suppose. Um, is I guess the way to do it. But I would say like it's probably a pretty rare event for a bird to collide. It's still rare for a bird to collide with the glass on a car, I would say. So have you experienced that exact thing before?
No, but it just occurred
Yeah,
to me thinking about just the sheer surface area out there of parked
yeah,
cars,
right.
that it could be an unseen problem,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, it definitely could. I have seen it once. I think that like it's sort of like when you compare it to the number of birds that hit buildings, it's going to be like statistically insignificant, the number of birds that are going to be accidentally hitting the glass on a parked car than on buildings. I have seen birds find their reflections on rear view mirrors. I live on 38th Street in Lawrenceville, and there was a brown-headed cowbird like getting mad at all the rear view mirrors on 38th Street. And so um I just told a couple of my neighbors just to tuck in their mirrors. Um but yeah, uh more birds die by getting hit by moving cars than by parked cars, for sure.
Nick, could you comment on bird feeding? I mean, it makes me feel good. I like to see the birds around, but is
Yeah.
it good, bad, neutral? And I've heard hummingbird feeders can really be bad because they get mold in the nectar and stuff.
Yeah, I'm pro feeding the birds, feeding them the like correct like good things like quality bird seed, suet, um and like nectar for hummingbirds, which really is just sugar water, just like sugar, white sugar and water. Um But you like alluded to like the issues that like it's about how you have to keep those surfaces clean. So like taking your feeder down once every couple of weeks, especially if it's like a tube feeder, to disinfect it is really important. Mold can grow in the hummingbird feeders. So you just have to be vigilant about cleaning it because you figure like, you know, it's like, you wouldn't want like feeders can really get busy, especially in the wintertime. And, if there's like 100 individuals visiting your feeder, right? They're like eating off of the same plate, right? Like to like create a human analogy. You wouldn't want to eat off the same plate that like 100 other people are eating off of. So just kind of like being mindful of that is the important part there. But yeah, anything we can do to supplement, like, I wish native plants could do all the feeding, but the reality is that um there it isn't enough. And that like, I have a feeder in my backyard also. So I do like to encourage feeding if someone again is gonna take the time to clean the feeders.
Well, I'll keep asking questions. One is like a billion birds obviously sounds like a lot, but as a percentage of bird deaths, I wonder what windows are. And I wonder how many birds raptors take.
Yeah. The billion number is like is yes, I mean hard to wrap your head around that. But it's a significant portion of the bird population and it doesn't discriminate either. So perfectly healthy birds
Mhm.
can die by flying into the windows. But we have an interesting paper came out a number of years ago that showed that we've lost 3 billion breeding aged birds since the 1970s, which I think amounts to about 25%. Um, we have 25% fewer birds in our ecosystems than we did in the 70s. Um, and so if I'm just kind of doing some math here, right? So if we have three, that means in the 70s there were like, let's say 12 billion birds. So like, if over a billion birds are dying by collisions, that total population might be like 9 billion birds now, 8 or 9 billion birds. So an eighth, like just kind of again, like this is not, I'm not doing science right now. I'm just kind of doing some quick math. Feels like an eighth of the total number of birds out in our ecosystems are dying from hitting windows, and that's a lot. Especially when you then add cats, which actually are the biggest killer of migratory songbirds.
Wow.
So combined, we're talking about between windows and cats, we're talking about billions. And as far as hawks go, that's hard to answer, but that one we really can't do anything about and we shouldn't
Sure.
because that's just part of the natural order of
Sure.
things. It's different than
Anybody
cats, right?
outlawed
Because
feral
those
cat? I mean,
yeah, oh, go ahead.
has any municipality ever outlawed people letting their cats outside?
Um, that's a great question. I don't think so. I don't think so, at least not in North America. Um, but there are some ambitious plans in other parts of the world, particularly in New Zealand.
Uh,
Um, uh, but it's I love I'm a cat person, and so I know that it's like it's a tricky subject, because um, yeah, the other end of the spectrum is that people um, feel that cats, even if they are pets, have a right to like roam outside. And I want them to have the best quality life out also, but I also don't want them to damage like already struggling native ecosystems. Um, so the key there is that like the cats aren't native here. If they were native, it would be, we can't do anything about it because that's just how the system has evolved. But our native birds haven't evolved any defense against cats, which is why they're taking out such high numbers of them.
Well, and let's also just point out that I'm a cat person. I have cats. My cats do not go outside, right?
Hmm.
House cats that go outside are not hunting for food. They are not,
Right.
it's not like a feral cat. You know, some communities
Right.
have issues with feral cats, and that's a completely different issue. And those
Yeah.
are hungry animals that, while they shouldn't be killing birds, they are eating what they kill. A lot of
Right.
times house cats are just hunting birds for sport, and
On
that's,
patrol. Yeah.
yeah, then that's, yeah, the onus has to go on the pet owner, right?
Yeah. That's right. It's part of responsible pet ownership. And like there are a lot of great, I mean, I don't have images of it, but like friend of mine, she's also on the Bird Lab board, Molly Toth. She worked for the National Aviary for a little bit. She's with the American Bird Conservancy. She has a big old cat named Murray who isn't maybe isn't the friendliest cat, but she can put a leash on him now, and they go for walks. And so there are like I find that a lot of people kind of laugh at that, like, oh, that's not my pup, my cat would never tolerate. Like if Murray can wear a collar and go outside on a leash, um like any cat, I think any cat can. um all about how dedicated you are to making that happen, to making that change.
Nick, there's a question in the chat. It's how
Uh,
can we keep window bird feeders, like the feeders that suction to a window,
yeah.
bird safe?
Um, so the those suction cup feeders are actually really good because for collisions, because the birds, right, they're flying like to that feeder. Um, and even if they kind of miss the mark or there's some like activity, they're not going to be flying fast enough to really injure themselves on the window. Um, so I would still advise you to like make them bird safe by putting the feather friendly is my fa is like for me is the best like retrofit product. I think it's about 25 bucks and for a roll of tape approximately. And then that covers a 4 foot by 4 foot window, which is like 16 square feet. So like it's a good bargain and it'll stay on the window for maybe 10 or 15, maybe even more years, depending on like the sun exposure and everything like that. But suction cup feeders are okay. I would still advise treating those windows. Um, and the other thing I wanted to say about it is that generally keeping feeders, like you either want to keep your feeders super close to the window or you want to put them really far away because when you put them in that like most people want to put them like in that 10 to 15 foot zone where they feel like they're not interrupting the birds but they can have really good views at them. That's actually like one of the most dangerous like spots for them because the birds can get enough momentum where if they see that the habitat in the windows, they'll have enough speed where they can really harm themselves. If the feeder is in like either on the window or within like a couple of feet, it's harder for them to get enough momentum. It can still happen, but it's harder for them to get enough momentum in flight to really injure themselves. If you like Google, I can't remember the specific numbers, but I believe it's up to 3 feet in front of the window is a good spot, and then after that, it's like 50 feet or more are the ideal locations. Audubon has those. I'm sorry, I can't recall the exact number for the far away distance, but up to 3 feet is advised, which is good for you because you just get that much closer to them.
Hey, Nick. Also, Nick, I was wondering, have you actually done any banding in truly urban settings, like in your backyard? Is that legal?
Yeah, I could band in my backyard, but I don't have a research question that involves banding my backyard birds at the moment. So I'm not going to. So we really only ban birds when we have like a scientific question to answer. And that's really important because otherwise You know, we want to make sure that because the reality is we are taking the birds out of their ecosystem for a few minutes when we go through this process, and so we want to make sure that we are doing it for scientific purposes. If I could probably come up with a project, but I'm not doing one at the moment. The National Aviary, through the Smithsonian, did a backyard banding project, where they were banding certain backyard birds. They stopped doing this a number of years ago, and a lot of those birds are still flying around, including a banded chickadee from like 12 years ago at my Upper St. Clair study site. Um, but yeah, like asking a question about like longevity of backyard birds is an interesting question, especially when you compare that to like birds, those same species that are in rural areas. So like is a cardinal that lives in Lawrenceville, like do cardinals in Lawrenceville have shorter lifespans than cardinals out in rural Butler County? Like that's an interesting question, right? And that has like a good foundation to it because we know that in cities, for example, there are more cars, there are more cats, there are more herbicides and pesticides generally. So that would be an interesting question, um, related to what you're asking.
Do we have any more questions?
Thanks, everyone. I forgot the slide that includes my email address, but
Oh,
uh, my bad on that. But it's nliadis@gmail.com, NLIADIS, and then bird lab, birdlab.org. There's a general email that goes to my inbox. So happy to chat more.
like info@birdlab.org or something?
It's tweet@birdlab.org.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we went kind of cutesy there.
Sure, yeah. Uh-huh.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for taking the time to speak with us this evening. I think
Yeah.
all really learned a lot.
Thanks for
And
having me.
absolutely. Thank you for all that you do to support our native birds and native plants. And if anyone has more questions, feel free to reach out to Nick or to Wild Ones. We're happy to support in any way possible. And if you
Wonderful.
haven't joined Wild Ones yet, consider becoming a member of our chapter.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you either on the panel, or at some of our upcoming native plant sales.
Thanks so much.